Welcome to episode 10 to the greatest show on YouTube, Educational Assessment with Professor DeNobile. And I'm your host, Professor DeNobile, and today's actually pretty fun. This is about designing tests and quizzes. Now, this is where I'm bringing nerdy back. This is actually really cool. This is a really cool uh presentation, because in this presentation we learn about everything we have at our disposal of all the different types of tests that we can make in as far as assessment goes, um and really the variety of the different types of questions that we could build. And if you like that kind of thing, you're gonna like this episode of Educational Assessment. So let's begin. So we're gonna be looking at how to write test questions and the general guidelines for writing test questions. Selected response, including true, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, matching. Told you this is going to be amazing. It's going to be fun. I'm going to have way too much fun today. I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it on the DL. I'm just saying. All right. Then we have constructed response, short answer, and extended response, and of course the essay. Okay, so this is not the fun part. It's the item analysis. But I have to say, what's cool about the item analysis is that once you're done with the item analysis, it gives you a lot of cool information of how to inform your instruction moving forward. So general guidelines for test questions. Test what you teach. It's very simple. If you didn't teach it, don't test it. It's not fun setting kids up for failure. That's just the bottom line. Test for higher cognitive thinking. Just because you can ask a question doesn't mean you should ask a question. If you're thinking that the students need to understand vocabulary, don't ask them, what is the definition of blank? Set the question up in such a way that they have to apply the definition in order to answer the question, because if they can apply the definition, then they know the definition. So always shoot for the higher cognitive thinking level. Don't lift statements directly from the text. We want them to think, not simply, one to one, because then kids just play scavenger hunt. The scavenger hunt doesn't mean that they actually learn something. Questions should be pertinent to course objectives. Avoid trivial facts. For example, ELA isn't about the books you're teaching, but the skills derived from the reading. So realize a couple of things here. So as an English teacher, this is something that is very important to me. I don't teach books. I teach skills. And that's very different from most of the other subjects. Most of the other subjects teach facts. Yes, there's application to those facts, which derive into skills, but a science class you can't pass unless you know and understand the underlying knowledge and facts about science, about math, about social studies. There's no way around it. But in English, uh, it's not so much about the facts, but really more about reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So I don't teach books. I teach skills through the books. Therefore, asking questions about them spitting back information from books does not tell me what they learned. It just told me they read a book. And they probably didn't even read it. They probably found the information online, which tells me even less. And with ChatGPT, which, by the way, I hope we get to do something with ChatGPT. I am loving ChatGPT if you know how to incorporate it. And I'm just getting ahead of myself because I'm excited about building tests right now. So you should be able to label questions with learning standards. You're going to see this a lot as we go through the presentation. If your objective is to see whether or not students are mastering the learning standards, you should be building your tests and aligning each individual question to a learning standard, which will allow you to do an item analysis, asterisk, talking about later in this presentation. Remember, the purpose of the test is to determine what students have learned. Again, test what you teach. If you didn't teach it, don't test it. True and false questions. These could be really cool, but don't waste energy creating stupid true and false questions. The statement should be 100% true or else it is false. Do not write, don't try, it's not challenging, it's not cute if you try to confuse students where you write a statement which is sometimes true and sometimes false. It does not help them in trying to figure out what you're trying to get out of them. Don't use opinions unless you are showing the source of the opinion, because the source of the opinion is going to determine whether the true false statement is true or false. According to Dr. So and so, blah, 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 blah. Because you said according to, then the students are applying it. That's a cooler true and false than simply, is the sky blue, true or false? Well, it's actually every other color but blue. Ha ha ha. Then we're not teaching science right now. Don't questions should be critical to the objectives of the course. Again, avoid using qualifiers such as sometimes or never, because sometimes and never means it's sometimes true and sometimes false, depending on the situation. Look at the Shermis Investa reading on page 161 of the PDF for this particular thing. They got some cool things in there about more rules for the true and false stuff. You should be able to label the questions with the learning standards. Again, so you could do an item analysis later on. Multiple choice questions. Items should be based on one idea. If you start putting multiple ideas into a multiple choice question, you're not going to get an accurate reading of whether or not the student is mastering the standard you're trying to measure with that question. Remember, assessments and tests and exams, they are measuring tools. They are like a slide ruler. They are like a protractor. They don't look like them, but that's their purpose. They measure mastery of standards. So they should be based on one idea, one standard that you're trying to test. Distractors in a multiple choice question. Remember, the function of a multiple choice question is you have the correct answer and then you have distractors. So distractors should be homogeneous and plausible, but clearly wrong. They should be curveballs, but they shouldn't be, oh my God, I have no clue. Like, it shouldn't be like two of them could be correct. It should be like, if you're thinking of a traditional four of them, this is typically how I do it. I do one or two that are clearly 100% wrong. Clearly, either you know it or you don't know it, but one or two of them are clearly wrong. Then you have the correct answer. So now you have the three. And then remember how I said the one or two? Because then you're going to have one or two distractors from those four. And those distractors should be plausible, meaning that they force the student to think beyond it, because a traditional multiple choice question, one, they could guess, which really doesn't help you. That's why they're not really the best in terms of determining, but they're necessary. The question stem should be specific, concise, and written in positive form. Avoid mechanical clues that will give away the answer. So don't so for example, don't say blah 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 or an, because if you say or an and then you give answer choices, you're letting the student know that if it's that the answer has to begin with a consonant. You're giving away answers, which defeats it. It questions the reliability of the test. Look at the Shermis Investa PDF reading on page 173. Just like before they talked about true and false, they talk about multiple choice here. You should be able to label questions with learning standards so that you could do an item analysis later on. We'll get to that soon. For fill in the blank, format your questions that require a short and specific answer. So don't have a fill in the blank where they have to, don't put one word and then have this long phrase to fill in the blank. Do the opposite. I like to do fill in the blanks for notes. The reason why I like to do them for notes is I tell them, think of the blanks as your gap in knowledge that you're trying to fill in. 2, it forces the students to focus on the key information you want them to know instead of them just writing down every single little thing that you're telling them in a mini lesson. Arrange blank spaces to be at the end of the sentence. Omit key words, but make sure there is still enough information to answer the question. Shermis and Vesta say a little bit about this on page 177 in the PDF reading. And again, you should be able to label questions with learning standards. Do you see a pattern here? Matching columns. The premise and alternatives should be homogeneous. List more alternatives than premises, or else the last answer is a given. I've always done matching columns with equal. I understand the purpose of this. Having an unequal list for the alternatives, meaning more, 1 or 2 more, means the students have to really think about what that last answer is instead of being like, well, I got 1 more left. This has to be it. 1-to-1 correspondence between premises and alternatives. Do not make it where 1 premise can go to 3 alternatives or vice versa. That defeats the whole purpose of a matching column. Avoid using clues such as plural premise and only 1 plural alternative. Again, just like don't give clues. Don't give away answers. It questions the reliability and validity of the test. You should be able to label questions with learning standards. I know you really want to know why, and we're going to get there soon. Short answer and extended response questions. Base your questions on important concepts. Indicate the type of reasoning and the form for the expected answer. Decide and indicate how partial responses will be scored, typically through the rubric. Point values of questions should match the amount of time students will spend answering the question. So, for example, if they're short response questions, they should be worth less than extended response questions, because the extended response questions will require more time, energy, and thinking in order to complete them. You should have a rubric aligned to the standards being assessed in the question. You want to align the standards with the question. And in the essay, you're going to use an essay to measure higher level cognitive processes. Emphasize understanding rather than rote memorization. So the essay should not be about students spitting back to you what you taught them in a lecture. Even though some teachers and professors do this, that's not the point of an essay question. Essays draw from main concepts. Consider framing the question in a new context and based on different backgrounds or perspectives. For example, if I'm teaching I'm teaching an analytical writing course this semester, I may have the in-class activity where I teach them the skill, and I may have the work of literature that I'm using to analyze in class. If I'm doing an in-class test, I may choose a different one than the one that I did in class to see, can they transfer the skill that I taught them in analyzing what I taught them in class. Because if I tell them, you're now going to write an essay based off of the one we studied in class, they may be just spitting back my lecture in the essay, which defeats the whole purpose of the assessment. Write questions with clear objectives to facilitate consistent grading. You should have a rubric aligned to the standards being assessed in the question because you want to align the question to the standards. Item analysis. Process of examining the class performance on individual items. Why would you do it? One reason, questions with the learning standards. You can see who has mastered the standards and who has not. That's why you want to align the questions with learning standards, because then when you do the item analysis, meaning, okay, question one, you had 120 students take the test. Question one was aligned to reading standard 1. Well, 43% of the class got it correctly. Well, we're going to have to review that standard. That's why it's important to align your questions to the standard so that it's not simply, I got a grade for the test, but I know which standards my students need to work on. And then there's 3 types of item analyses. Know these, going to be on your test. The difficulty index, the discrimination index, and the analysis of response options. The difficulty index measures how easy an item is in the test. The proportion of students in class who got an item correct, the number of students who got the correct answer divided by the total number of students who took the test. The difficulty index ranges from 0 to 1. The discrimination index tells you how well response alternatives discriminate successful from less successful students. This compares how overall high scorers compared to overall low scorers on the particular item. You sort your test by score and create 2 groups, the high and the low scorers. So you cut it down the middle, 50-50. Calculate a difficulty index for the item for each group, then subtract the difficulty index from the low group of the low group from the high group. We all make mistakes, myself included. That's why we got erasers. All right, so, and the discrimination index ranges from -1 to +1. The analysis of response options is the percentage of students who chose each response options on a particular item. To calculate, divide the number of students who chose each answer option by the total number of students. So you'll see like question A, B, C, D. 0% chose A. 75% chose B, 25% chose C, 25% chose D. Well, maybe that's a really good question, because you had 2 distractors that clearly distracted the students in the bell curve, 25, 75, 25. B was still the right answer, so 75% of the class got it right. So in this analysis of response option, you can help to see if the distractors were plausible. And in my made up scenario, they were plausible to the students. All right. So summary. Follow the general guidelines for developing fair, rigorous test questions. Selected response questions such as true, false, multiple choice, fill the blank, matching column can be constructed to assess high-level thinking and should be aligned to the specific standards. I want to go back to the thing of that they are constructed to assess high-level thinking, because often teachers kind of like, we're going to make fun multiple choice questions. I remember when I was first teaching, I thought I was being cute where I would have multiple choice questions and one answer would be Mickey Mouse. Like, clearly that's an obviously wrong question. I wasn't helping my students at all by doing that. You want to be able to have question stems and answer choices that are rigorous and assess high level thinking. And it's about how you write them. And if you don't know how to write a high level thinking question, the way that you do it is you study the state exam for your grade level or the next state exam that it will be given to your students, and you break apart how they wrote their selected response questions. What type of verbs do they use? How do they write the subjects of the questions? How do they construct the answer selections, the answer options? That's how you figure out how to create a high level thinking question. And it aligns to the standards that you're doing in your program, because eventually the students have to pass that exam. Constructed response questions assess higher level thinking skills. They should have a rubric that is aligned to the assessed standards. You do both of this so that you could do item analyses, which will help us assess the effectiveness of the assessment and provide data on how we should modify instructions. This is known as data-driven instruction, and data-driven instruction is another example as to how assessment drives instruction. Thank you. I hope to get the next episode out tonight as well. I look forward to seeing you soon.